Hello and welcome to the first lecture for Introduction to Intelligence. In this lecture we're going to provide really an insight into the topic and capture some of the early thinking that we cover in the course, really to set you on the right direction for intelligence and how we think about intelligence. Certainly for those of us living through what are quite extraordinary times, issues such as pandemics, conflict, internal challenges within borders and externally, new developments in crime, criminality, constant discussions and threats of conflict between states and within states. Intelligence remains important, and not only just from a independent observer's perspective, but when you look at the funding that governments, agencies, in the public sector and military context, but also increasingly in the private sector, are putting into what is broadly described as intelligence. We can see that there is an expectation amongst decision makers, amongst commanders, amongst leaders, and amongst business managers that intelligence is fundamentally important. And certainly in a time of such uncertainty, when any nation or organisation, agency or business is increasingly looking for a competitive advantage, intelligence is seen as offering that capability to provide that competitive advantage, whether it's through deeper understanding of problems, and insights gained through research and analysis, or whether it's through timely and rapid insights into problems to stay ahead of a competitor or adversary or a cyber criminal. Intelligence is increasingly seen as important and fundamental to organisations and agencies, far beyond the broader conventional concepts of intelligence. So in the last kind of 2 decades, we've seen this broadening of intelligence from this national security realm, agencies that people would be aware of, such as the CIA, such as MI6, such as ASIO, ASIS, those kind of agencies that were traditionally and conventionally associated intimately with intelligence. We've seen a broadening. Certainly in the last few decades, policing intelligence has come to the fore as that emphasis on intelligence-led policing has taken hold across a number of nations, such as the UK, Canada, the US and Australia and New Zealand, those traditional Five Eyes partners. So we've seen a broadening outside of the national security and military intelligence from the world wars, where intelligence was, developed within that concept of fighting and winning battles and getting an understanding of a military enemy, through to more policing taking a hold and maturing, looking at crime and criminality and how that can be addressed, through to the private sector increasingly looking at intelligence and analysis to provide that competitive advantage. And as we've seen things like the rise of the internet and the free availability of mountains of information that just requires a level of analysis to draw insights from, intelligence has broadened and continues to broaden in terms of how it's perceived and understood and who wants to take it on. And so if you have a look at organisations, government agencies themselves, where intelligence traditionally sits, even there, pretty much all government agencies, certainly at the federal level, increasingly at state levels, are employing people in this kind of intelligence role, outside of traditional national security aspects into areas that we wouldn't traditionally associate with intelligence, whether that's the environment and analysis of threats there, up until a couple of kind of decades ago. And so intelligence has broadened. It's not going away. in terms of its importance. And when you look at funding for intelligence resources and capabilities and analysts, we see that there is usually ongoing funding, often increased funding in this area. And pre-COVID, there was an interesting article by an Australian newspaper which actually highlighted two areas they saw as growth areas for employment. One was psychology and the other was intelligence analysis. And even kind of during COVID and post-COVID, there is an expectation that that intelligence role and a career in intelligence is a growing opportunity as the field continues to grow and adapt, with now discussions about looking at health and health intelligence as well. So not only is intelligence here to stay, and not only has it been recognised kind of within the field of intelligence studies as important, but those decision makers with access to funding, again, whether they be in the public sector, military, policing, or the private sector, increasingly see intelligence as worth funding and providing a competitive advantage. And we'll touch on this during the course. So the approach for the course, the learning method, is really captured by this quote is, if it's going to be, it's up to me. So I encourage you to get involved, get your readings done, read the extra suggested readings, ask questions. The discussion forum is a great opportunity for that. Engage with your peers there. Get involved, read as much as you can. This is an opportunity to learn and really understand what is an important field, and as I said, a field that is growing in importance. But again, the onus is on you. It's like anything you want to do, put in the effort, work hard, and reap the rewards. So I encourage you to get involved. You will find that I respond to questions and emails in a timely manner. I do not forget what it's like to be a student, and I always appreciated lecturers who got back to me quickly and in a timely manner. So that's my approach to the course. The course is online. It's designed for maximum flexibility. We have a lot of people across a lot of different time zones. Some of them already involved in the field, some of them looking at getting into the field, some of them in full-time study, some of them in full-time work, balancing family, work, study. I've been there, I understand that. So the course is designed for maximum flexibility. So you have the learning modules, which you can engage with, and the readings. There are no set times for attendance during this course. There will be some fortnightly online meetings, and those details will be provided to you. But again, they're not mandatory. We will record those so that if you can't make it, you have the opportunity to see those and engage. And at any time, if you've got a question, I much prefer that people send me an email, ask the question, even if it seems obvious. If you've been through the subject outline and you can't find an answer, or if something's unclear, then do ask me a question. And I will get back to you. Again, I'd much rather you ask than get concerned or wonder. There's no such thing as a silly question. Ask the question, more than happy for that. And you will see throughout the course, my focus is very much on asking questions and intelligence as a question asking field of study and field of knowledge. So that's my emphasis there, and that's what I encourage. Ask the questions, and I will provide the answers, or I'll let you know, because it's a broad and growing field, if I don't know the answer, which is something, a behavioural trait I would encourage amongst intelligence practitioners. Don't make up answers. If you don't know the answer to a question, go away and find out. But when it comes to commanders, decision makers, if they ask a question and you don't know the answer, be clear, be upfront, so you don't know, and you can provide an opinion, but make it clear that's an opinion. And we'll touch on that during the course as well. So I want to start with looking at how to think about intelligence. Fundamentally important to arrive at a definition of intelligence. And you'll see during these first couple of weeks, we do spend a lot of time thinking about intelligence, what it is, how people define it and think about it. And as is shown during the learning module and the readings, this is not just an academic exercise, kind of pontificating on theories and ideas about what intelligence is. It has a practical application. And in the readings, you'll see intelligence agencies themselves here in Australia and overseas spend time defining what they mean by intelligence. It has a practical outcome, and it's of practical importance to define what we mean by intelligence. And the takeaway, I guess, from all of this would be if you are in the field or if you're going into an agency or organisation, whether it's the private sector, public sector, whether it's police, military, find out how that organisation defines intelligence. What do they mean by intelligence? So we can provide you with a whole bunch of definitions during the course, but if you're in the field, the important thing is to find out what your agency, organisation or unit thinks intelligence means. And understands intelligence to be. And that's a critical aspect, and I'd encourage you to reflect on that. It's practical because defining what intelligence is also helps us define what intelligence isn't. And if you're in an organisation that sees intelligence as, say, forecasting and prediction and the expectation that intelligence will be able to provide a 100% accurate picture of what's coming in the weeks, months and years ahead, then I think you identify already that there's some challenges with that and some problems with that, given the challenges of human prediction. So find out from a practical point of view, if you're in the field or going into the field, how does the agency, organisation or unit you're working for understand and define intelligence? So one of the aspects that we look at and ways of breaking it up is by a writer, Binford. And Binford provides an interesting kind of three-part distinction which we'll talk about for thinking about intelligence. And Binford defines intelligence in three ways, kind of looking at definitions of intelligence, but arguing that it actually needs to cover three aspects. And that is, we can think of intelligence as a process, the process of coming up with judgments and assessments, a product, so a final intelligence product that's delivered to a client, or some people say a customer or a commander operator, or the intelligence agency or organisation itself. So it's those three aspects that we can look at and think about intelligence: as a process, as a product, or as an agency or organisation. And we'll talk about this. So intelligence is a process. One of the things you'll come across in the intelligence field, and we cover in the course material, is this idea of an intelligence cycle. That is, intelligence is a process. And the traditional intelligence cycle looks at this idea of direction, of collation or collection of information, of analysis of that information, of disseminating that analysed information to a client, and then this feedback and review process, which is kind of a cyclical process for what intelligence is, how it's done. It's identifying a problem, it's collecting information about that, it's analysing that information, it's producing some type of judgment or assessment in a certain type of format, it's disseminating that to those who have a need to know, or the client who's requested it, and potentially beyond, and then it's a feedback from that client. Did it meet the purposes? Was it useful? Was it not? Did it meet the mark? If not, why not? And that review process for that continual improvement. So again, we can think of intelligence, this is what Binford's talking about, is intelligence as a process. And I've thrown up various pictures of alternative models because in recent years, there's been a lot of debate over the intelligence cycle. So it's important to understand the cycle. It's also important to think about, and we cover during the course and the materials, how other people have taken and interpreted the cycle. And that, again, is from a practical point of view. This is not just esoteric theoretical concepts, but these are often agencies themselves saying, well, here's how we understand these cycles, the intelligence cycle, and intelligence as a process. These are the steps that we go through. And there's debate over, is it kind of this linear cyclical model? Is it one that takes place at the same time and feeds into each other? And these are what these various versions of the model capture in the debate and ongoing discussion. And again, we're taking these from agencies and organisations who do intelligence, showing that this is at the forefront of their thinking. How do we understand intelligence as a process? And we're not going to come up with a final set defined, this is the way to do it process. But again, it's worth understanding that different agencies and organisations perceive the intelligence cycle and intelligence process differently. And it's about understanding that, looking at the differences, why there are differences, as well as the similarities. But as a concept of intelligence and process, the intelligence cycle is something that you need to be aware of, learn and understand, and we're going to cover on this course. So that's this idea of intelligence as a process. I'll take a quote from my book talking about this intelligence as a process. And this is a point I make in the course text, Applied Thinking for Intelligence Analysis. And I make the argument there is a great deal of discussion about intelligence analysts supporting decision makers. What is less often recognised is that intelligence analysis is itself a form of decision making. Intelligence analysis is a continual process of forming judgments, i.e. making decisions based on available information while dealing with inherent uncertainty. It is this analysis of information and the judgments and assessments that analysts make that represents the decision-making process of intelligence analysis. Consequently, intelligence analysis is part of the decision-making process, and the judgments that analysts make influence the quality of other people's decisions. And I emphasize this when we're thinking about intelligence as a process, which is really that focus of the book I've done, because it's fundamentally important. But we often hear about intelligence provides that supporting role, intelligence supporting decision making. And what I'm emphasizing here, and I emphasize during the course and get you to kind of think on and take away, is actually intelligence analysts, intelligent process, and the judgments and assessments that are being made are part of those broader decision-making processes, because intelligence is telling a client, a military or police commander, operators, decision-makers, policymakers, they are telling them a certain perspective, a certain understanding, providing them with an insight into a problem. And that insight is the judgment that those intelligence practitioners have made. They have made decisions about what information is credible, what information isn't, what do we understand about this problem, taken the information that's been collected and now has been analysed, what are the judgments that we're reaching. So in effect, intelligence is framing and shaping the way that clients and those decision makers think about a problem. So that's fundamentally important as part of the decision-making process. And what that does is actually puts the onus on intelligence practitioners to provide the best level of analysis they can, to provide the best judgments that they can, to make clear the evidence they have and the evidence that they don't have, what is missing, in order for decision makers to understand the basis and strength of these judgments, as well as the limitations of those judgments. Now, decision makers will also have other sources of information they are drawing on to make their decisions. There'll be things like budgets, operational requirements, a whole bunch of other factors. But intelligence is important in shaping these perceptions, and intelligence matters. And that's why I emphasise and will continue to emphasise this idea that intelligence analysis is part of that decision-making process, making it fundamentally important. Yes, it's supporting clients, decision makers, but it's also heavily influencing them. And that's what makes it important. And it makes intelligence and the basis for these judgments so important to understand, as well as its limitations. One way that this is captured, and you can look for I guess, definitions for this online, is when we're talking about intelligence as a process, is kind of this idea in knowledge management of taking kind of data, information, building towards knowledge and wisdom. And there's obviously criticisms of any model that you have, but it's not a bad way of thinking about what intelligence is actually trying to do. And intelligence as a process is taking those potentially ones and zeros and that information and actually analysing it, producing knowledge to provide hopefully some wisdom and insight into the judgments and decisions that are being made. And so the importance of questions is fundamental in intelligence, and as part of that process, as I mentioned at the start of this discussion, intelligence is about question asking. It is a knowledge development field. It's very much focused on taking information, providing judgments and analysis against that to develop knowledge and to provide that knowledge to someone. Intelligence isn't an end in itself. It provides that knowledge and judgments to a decision maker, a policy maker, a commander, an operator, for them to make further decisions about actions to take or actions not to take. And so this idea of intelligence as a process, think about that in terms of intelligence as asking and answering questions. And that'll be a theme throughout the course because it's fundamental to intelligence as a field. And again, the text for the course, Applied Thinking for Intelligence Analysis, that's really looking at Binford's first kind of focus on intelligence as a process. And we're going to touch on other aspects of intelligence throughout the course, but that's the context from the book I've put forward. Binford also talks about intelligence as a product. So we've taken intelligence as a process and intelligence as a product. And you often hear within the media or within government figures mentioning kind of the intelligence we have, and that can refer to information, sometimes used for information, and we argue that that's probably not enough, but they'll often be referring to intelligence as a product. So I mentioned that intelligence doesn't just exist for its own sake. The information that's collected and analysed is produced or delivered to clients as a product, often referred to as finished intelligence. And so the other way we're looking at intelligence is this idea as a product, a formal report or a formal paper, a formal assessment that is published, that is made available usually to those who need to know. But increasingly, we've seen a lot of intelligence analysis, and you can do a search on the internet and find a lot of unclassified intelligence assessments by intelligence agencies in Australia, UK, US, to give some examples, that are actually publicly available. And they're useful for looking at. So this idea of intelligence also as a product, this finished product, published judgments and assessments that are produced and provide that fundamental output, a fundamental deliverable that intelligence practitioners are required to produce. So again, intelligence is more than just the process. There's a product that comes out of it, and that's another aspect of looking at intelligence as a product. Again, there are unclassified examples and declassified examples that are really good for looking at. What we don't do in this course, we don't provide you with a defined set pro forma. Those are out there. But kind of as I mentioned at the outset when I was talking about definitions of intelligence, each agency will have its own definition, and each agencies and organisations will have different types of reports and different types of pro formas and different types of formats that they use. Now we provide some generalisations and summaries of those, which show you how they're really often tied to a set of questions. So that's our approach, looking at the generic intelligence product and how it answers questions. And you can see that in the assessment case study that we provide you in Assessment 1, looking at that broad generic approach. We're not going to provide you with a set format or pro forma, but if you're in the field, if you're going into an intelligence agency, find out what those are, how it is that those intelligence products are produced, what they look like, where they go. That's fundamentally important because, as I said, and we'll emphasise throughout, intelligence doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to produce intelligence products, reports, to assist decision makers, to assist clients in coming to informed and reasoned judgments and decisions about actions for them to take or policies for them to develop. So intelligence as a product is the other of, it's the second of Binford's arguments. And then finally we think about intelligence as agency, or intelligence as organisations, and that's the third way we look at thinking about intelligence. And for example, in the case of Australia, we have a national intelligence community. There was previously the Australian Intelligence Community, which was made up of 6 national security defence focused agencies. Those agencies were expanded in recent years and renamed to the National Intelligence Community. So within that National Intelligence Community, and I've got a link here for oni.gov.au, those intelligence agencies are often referred to as, when they talk about intelligence, it's the organisation or the agency being conceptualised or thought of or considered. And so those agencies within Australia, the National Intelligence Community, consists of the Office of National Intelligence, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the intelligence aspect of the Australian Federal Police, the Australian Geospatial Intelligence Organisation, Australian Signals Directorate, Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, the intelligence aspect of AUSTRAC, the intelligence aspect of the Department of Home Affairs, and finally the Defence Intelligence Organisation. Now have a look at those. You can research them online. Again, ONI provides great links to those. What has been really interesting over the last decade plus within the field is the amount of publicly available information that these intelligence agencies or agencies with intelligence functions put out and make freely available. And it's quite remarkable. Myself, I did a PhD in intelligence, and it was remarkable how much is publicly available and freely available. So I would encourage you to look at those, get familiar with those organisations and agencies. Some of them will have changed their names over the last few years if you haven't been in the field for a while. So have a look at those and where they've come from. But that's at the national intelligence level. You then have state intelligence at the state level. The state police agencies also have their intelligence functions, but in terms of the national intelligence community, this is the example of what we have here in Australia and how intelligence as agencies is understood and conceptualised. So they're the 3 we looked at with Binford's kind of conceptualising intelligence. Intelligence as a process, intelligence as a product, and intelligence as an agency. One of the things you're going to touch on in this course, and that will clearly come through, is that there is a language of intelligence. There are terms and phrases that are evident in the field of intelligence and intelligence studies that, not unlike any field of research or any practical undertaking, you will have a set language and a specific language. Part of the language we've already introduced you to is the intelligence cycle. That's something that is a conceptualization that's understood by practitioners in whatever various form it takes. This idea of an intelligence cycle is part of that language of intelligence. So as we go through, we'll be pointing you in the direction of, and it will become apparent, this language of intelligence. And as we talk about types of intelligence, you'll start to pick up on those. The reason we're drawing this to the front is just be aware that, as with any field, there's a language associated with it. And part of it is learning that language and understanding that there are certain meanings and certain ways of associating terms and certain concepts that are very familiar to people in that field, and we're going to touch on those so that by the end of the course you've got an insight and understanding. But again, with different agencies and different organisations and in different countries, they may be slightly nuanced. So don't expect hard and fast definitions or concepts to translate immediately, specifically and identically from organisation to organisation. And we will look at different fields of intelligence like military intelligence, policing intelligence, national security intelligence in the course, and you can see there are different nuances between them. They're broadly intelligence, but they obviously have a different focus. So when we're talking about the language, don't expect that everything is hard and fast. And my emphasis again is have a look, much like the intelligence cycle that agencies put out. Here's the cycle we use. Think of that in terms of the field of intelligence. Here's an agency's understanding. Here's a particular organisation's understanding of intelligence, how they provide intelligence, the type of products they produce, what they mean. And you'll find that broadly. You'll also find, as you go through, there is no hard and fast and agreed definition of intelligence anywhere. And that's not unusual. We can compare that to something like define terrorism, defining a number of concepts. There's a lot of debate and discussion around it. There's some general agreement, but there's not necessarily going to be a single agreed definition that people across organisations and agencies are going to come together and say, yep, that's the one we're sticking with, often because there are so many different agencies and different nuances and perspectives, and that's fine. Understanding that different agencies and different contexts of intelligence, be they private sector, public sector, be it military, be it police or national security, will have different focuses. So that's quite normal. There will be slight differences in interpretations of language and definitions. I emphasise that this course is an opportunity for deliberate thinking about this field. Breakspa produces a great observation, and to quote, intelligence practitioners, like many other professionals, are not necessarily given to introspection. They often rely on anecdotal or aphoristic explanations of their craft. And that's, again, true for any kind of practitioners. This is an opportunity to, if you're in the field or if you're interested in the field, to actually step back and deliberately think about the field of intelligence. What it is, what are some of the strengths, what are some of the limitations, and what do these mean? So it's a great opportunity, so I would encourage you, again at the start, if it is to be, it's up to me, take advantage of this opportunity to deliberately think about intelligence and the field. So one of the things I wanted to touch on briefly was this idea of what is analytic best practice. And a couple of years ago I was asked this by a practitioner, and as I emphasised, it's a good question. What is analytic best practice? As we touch on throughout the course material, intelligence is a new field. So we're only talking in terms of the deliberate development of a field of intelligence studies, we're only talking kind of post-World War II. So it's not a long time in the field of any field of study. And so we are still learning a lot about intelligence. As much as we've got a lot of practical insights, there's a lot that we're still yet to learn. And so this question on what is analytic best practice is actually an ongoing question. We are still learning. And so Dami is one of the researchers in the field who in recent years has taken to looking at analytic techniques and some of their effectiveness or otherwise. She and her team identified 75 analytic techniques, and we touch on these in the course material. And what they emphasised and what I highlighted at the outset is, again, we're still learning about the field. And this is what they had to say. Although the underlying assumption is that analysts using these techniques will perform better than those that do not, the effectiveness of these techniques has rarely been empirically tested. So what we're starting to see in the last couple of years and hopefully moving forward is a lot more empirical testing of some of the intelligence as a process, the intelligence techniques that are used, analytic techniques. And so that's an exciting area. And why we emphasize that is there are limits to our knowledge and for the field of intelligence studies, and we are pushing forward and trying to better understand that. It's an exciting field to be part of. It's a new field, and you will learn that it does have limitations, and that's okay. Like any field, you want to learn what it covers well and what it's also still learning from. So that's what we're going to cover in this course as well, what intelligence does, but also where those limits are. So this is a known problem. One of the former deputy directors for national intelligence. So this is a known problem. As Thomas Fingar, a former Deputy Director of National Intelligence for analysis said within the US, analysts work in many different ways for many different reasons, but we lack an empirical basis to determine which ways are best in general and or for the analysis of particular types of problems under different time constraints and so on. We could know this and we should know this. And so what I'd emphasise within the field is we are starting to learn about this. One thing I wanted to, I guess, look at and touch on is a lot of discussion within intelligence is increasingly focused on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and certainly a recent article by The Guardian where the director of GCHQ in the UK emphasised that artificial intelligence certainly could have a major impact on the way that GCHQ works. We're talking about masses of amounts of data being collected, and they're looking at artificial intelligence to look at identifying trends and patterns, collating and working through that data. And what I would say is the field of intelligence is going to look at AI and machine learning and apply that to vast swathes of information. But the human is not going to disappear from intelligence analysis. And even in this article, it was emphasised that AI is probably going to provide an augmented support for intelligence analysis and intelligence analysts. AI might flag certain information for a human analyst to look at. And the human analyst is not going to go away. So if you're looking at getting into the field is not going to disappear for human analysts. In fact, humans are increasingly identified within AI as being able to provide context and ask questions that are going to remain fundamentally important. So that's not just me saying that. A recent publication by the Social Sciences Academy in Australia that was sponsored by the Office of National Intelligence actually looked at social science research in intelligence in Australia, what it has to offer. And they actually made this observation, and I'll quote, "Social science research can assist in shaping how AI is used. Automation will involve confirmation bias and risks will remain throughout AI's evolution. High-level skills will need to be cultivated within the NIC, National Intelligence Community, and the role of the intelligence analyst will continue to be an essential component of analysis. Such high-level skills are reserved only to humans and will remain as such. AI may further assist with pattern recognition, but social science expertise can be tapped by the NIC to help inform context and more rigorous analysis." So what I'd emphasise is humans are not going away. Humans have a fundamentally important role to play, and intelligence analysts are here to stay. Again, an example from a few years ago that is instructive. When the Notre Dame fire in Paris took hold, this is an interesting article that got picked up by a number of news reporters, and that was that YouTube, with videos being uploaded from the fire and of the fire by witnesses and the news media, actually labelled it as a conspiracy. So the algorithm on YouTube decided that what was in reality, an actual fire taking place at the Notre Dame Cathedral was actually fake information, was a conspiracy, and was actually flagging that data. Now, it took a human to identify that problem to go in and change the algorithm. So that was just an example of do not assume AI gets everything right. As was mentioned by the Social Sciences Council, it has its own biases inbuilt because algorithms are developed by humans, and it's often humans that have to identify those problems and fix them. So the takeaway is people will always matter in intelligence and intelligence analysis. Indeed, people will remain central to the intelligence process. I wanted to finish on a couple of things. One of them is a quote by Pablo Picasso, which I think is a good way of tying this in. Computers are useless. They can only give you answers. And we talked about intelligence as a question asking and a question answering field. And that is that fundamentally important part of intelligence practitioners' role is asking and developing questions in order to provide answers to those. And they may not be the questions that are originally asked of them. They, as intelligence practitioners, might need to work with clients, or might need to take these questions away and work on what is the actual question that needs to be asked. And again, it may not be the initial question that is asked. It may be that the question needs developing and breaking down. And again, the readings and course material are going to look at that. So I would say welcome to the course. It is a good course. Pleased to say that recently we actually picked up an award for the Masters of Intelligence Analysis course. We were the inaugural winners of the Innovation in Intelligence Award from the Australian Institute of Professional Intelligence Officers. So welcome to the course. It's a good course. Feedback from previous students is that you'll get a lot out of the course. Again, put in work hard. If it is to be, it's up to me. So work hard at the course. You'll find that I'm engaging. I'll respond quickly and looking forward to working through this course with you and working through a better understanding of the field of intelligence.